Greetings, magical mavens. It's Afura here, the Writing Witch, and welcome to our next installment in our Witchy Cyclical Living series for the 2024 into 2025 year, the Astrological Wheel of the Year. On this channel, we like to tune into the seasonal living of the Wheel of the Year, and in past years we have focused on the 8-spoke Wheel of the Year that most pagans and witches are familiar with. But instead of feeling like we have to look at it as 8 individual days on the calendar where we have to cram all of our seasonal magic into just that one day or even that one weekend or that one week of the season, instead I like to look at it as if we are cutting the year into 8 equal parts, each that are about 6 weeks long. This gives us the whole 6 weeks surrounding a sabbat on the Wheel of the Year to slow down and truly enjoy and integrate the magic of each season in our everyday lives. But this year, to dive even deeper into the plant, tend, harvest, compost cycle of the Wheel of the Year, instead of splitting the year up into 8 sections of 6 weeks long, this year we are zooming in even closer and taking a look at the year as it's split up into 12 seasons of 4 weeks long, the zodiac Wheel of the Year. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into the energies of Sagittarius season. Greetings, magical mavens. The winter solstice is just around the corner on December 22nd. In the northern hemisphere, this moment near the end of the modern calendar year is one of 2 days, 6 months apart, when the sun reaches an extreme turning point in its cycle. This time transitioning out of the darkening half of the year and into the brightening half of the year. The solstice is a powerful reset point, corresponding to the witch's sabbat known as Yule, a celebration of the end of the year and the astrological beginning of winter. It's a time that energetically supports us to both look back on the year past and forward to the year to come. In this video, I'll be sharing with you 4 fun and powerful ways to harness the energy of this time of year by tapping into all 4 elements. Above and beyond just the typical traditions you've probably heard about a million times over, instead, we're diving much deeper into the how to harness the actual astrology of the season to maximize our joy and fulfillment in early winter. Here on this channel, we like to embrace a slower living approach to celebrating the Wheel of the Year, not cramming all our traditions into one day or even just the week surrounding the sabbat, but instead gradually embracing each season for multiple weeks surrounding each sabbat. This approach is beautifully supported by astrology. If you're new to the concept of how the zodiac signs and the witchy Wheel of the Year are intrinsically linked, you're really in for a treat. In the first 3 videos in this series, I've already gone deeply into detail on exactly how mind-blowing this correlation is, so I'm not going to take up too much time going over it again in this video. But in short, the zodiac wheel and the pagan sabbat wheel are one and the same. It's just that the sabbat system breaks up the year into 8 parts, whereas zodiac astrology breaks it up into 12. The main anchor points are still the solstices, equinoxes, and cross quarters, but where in witchcraft each quarter of the year is divided into 2 sabbat seasons, astrology splits each quarter of the year into 3 phases, providing an even deeper and more nuanced perspective on how the plant, tend, harvest, compost cycle works in the universe through the magical power of 3. Just like the visible phases of the moon that make up the triple moon symbol we like to use as witches, this maiden mother crone concept also appears in the phases of each season. Where the sabbats show us how each of the 4 seasons has an early and late phase, astrology shows us a more zoomed in view of each season's beginning, middle, and end. It also ties in with the balance of the elements and helps us make sense out of lunar manifesting, our moods, and so much more. Astrology can seem really complicated, but if you're at all familiar with the witchy Wheel of the Year, you're already well on your way to understanding astrology. The basic concept of the sabbats provides a base level for how astrology works, and you can easily build your knowledge from that place. If you're curious about these mind-blowing details of how everything in the universe fits together perfectly, I definitely invite you to go back and watch the introduction video to this series. But for this video, we are going to be looking at the astrology of the winter solstice and how to celebrate using these more nuanced astrological themes. The winter solstice is one of the most magical days of the year, and it's known by many witches as Yule or midwinter. In the Wiccan Wheel of the Year tradition, Yule, the transition between Sagittarius season and Capricorn season, celebrates what's considered the pre-Christian version of Christmas. Not only is there evidence that most Christmas traditions stem from an earlier time and various ancient cultures, but Yule is also now an opportunity for pagans to continue celebrating a winter holiday if they're already used to doing so from a cultural standpoint. This concept is brilliantly supported by the astrology of the season. See, Sagittarius season, which we're currently in, is the 9th sign of the zodiac and the last sign of autumn. While it isn't always recognized as having a sabbat correspondence, like all zodiac signs, it plays a key role in the story that's being told by the sabbats and the seasons. Sagittarius season represents the last of 3 phases of the fall season, and it ends on the last day of fall. The sun moves out of the sign of Sagittarius at the moment of the astronomical event known as the winter solstice in the northern hemisphere. Sagittarius energy is related to the divine masculine fire element, and its main theme is philosophy. It also deals with themes of adventure, leadership, and enthusiasm. The archetype of Sagittarius is the healer aspect of our personality, and this time of year invites us to set intentions to heal and better understand ourselves and the world. This period between about November 22nd and December 21st is a great time to begin feeling into our intentions for the year to come based on the wisdom we've acquired in the past year. In astrology, a sign is associated to the beginning, middle, and end of each of the 4 seasons. Libra season back at the autumn equinox was the cardinal, or first sign of fall. Then Samhain/Halloween landed in the middle of Scorpio season, which was the fixed sign of fall, aka the middle, height, and epitome of fall. Now Sagittarius is the mutable or final sign of fall, giving way to winter. Oftentimes, folks find it easy to remember that Libra corresponds to Mabon and Scorpio corresponds to Samhain. But mutable signs like Sagittarius often get overlooked in the generalized correspondence of sabbats and zodiacs, but it provides so much wisdom when we slow down and tap into it. Cardinal and fixed signs are easier to remember when it comes to their sabbat correspondences because those 8 zodiac signs all either start on a solstice or equinox or have a cross-quarter sabbat, aka Celtic Fire Festival, that lands right in the middle of them. But that leaves 4 zodiac seasons, the mutable signs, which lead us through the final days of each of the 4 main seasons and right up to the next solstice or equinox. So for those of us in this community who celebrate about the 6 weeks surrounding each sabbat, Sagittarius is essentially the time when we start shifting out of autumn mode and begin gradually adapting into the winter phase. It's that preparing for Yule time period. The ruling planet of Sagittarius is Jupiter, the luminary named for the king and father of the gods in the ancient Greco-Roman pantheon. Named Zeus by the Greeks and Jupiter by the Romans, he ruled over the sky, thunder, and themes of higher gnosis, wisdom, justness, and spiritual wisdom. The planet Jupiter is associated with magnetism, expanding and empowering anything it touches, in turn also becoming associated with themes of optimism and the gift-giver archetype. In fact, I have heard some astrologers and pagans even consider Jupiter the cosmic Santa Claus, embodying the vibes of Father Christmas or even the ghost of Christmas present. The key phrase for Sagittarius is I see, and it represents the healer archetype, someone who has the higher wisdom to form a bridge between the greater meaning of life and the day-to-day experiences of humans. While the ruling planet of Sagittarius is Jupiter, this sign also resonates with another figure from Greco-Roman mythology, the centaur Chiron, the embodiment of the wounded healer archetype. representing how in life we go through challenges that can offer us wisdom that can help heal others. The story goes that Chiron was an immortal centaur who specialized in healing others, but he was accidentally wounded and lived as something like a martyr until Zeus/Jupiter granted him the quote-unquote gift of death and placed his soul in the sky as the Centaurus constellation, emphasizing the philosophical theme that life's blessings can often come in disguise. Just like every sabbat has its opposite on the wheel of the year, so too does every sign of the zodiac. We're empowered to achieve balance each season by being mindful of the spectrum between the two. Just as Yule, or the winter solstice, is opposite on the wheel from Litha, or the summer solstice, the opposite of Sagittarius is Gemini, the mutable sign that completes the spring season 6 months later. What we notice about these opposites is that they aren't really true opposites, but just opposite sides of the same spectrum of themes. Sagittarius, leading up to Yule, deals with themes of philosophy as it pertains to idealism and deeper spiritual wisdom, whereas Gemini, leading up to Litha, deals with themes of philosophy as it pertains to a more playfully curious desire for mental stimulation. The universal theme of the Gemini-Sagittarius axis is the balance between the wisdom of the mind and the wisdom of the heart. And in our lives, as in nature, it's always important to maintain a sense of balance. And the Wheel of the Year demonstrates for us that balance comes in many forms. There's a time and place for everything. It isn't always about a perfect state of neutral moderation. Sagittarius season is an example of a time when the scales are tipped towards faith and focus, and a time for pointing our metaphorical arrows toward that which resonates most as truly ideal for ourselves in the world. But at the same time, the balance is there when we look closely at the seasonal cycles at play. This balance is often exhibited in our seasonal traditions, whether we're aware of it or not. Sagittarius energy is essentially the approximate month between Thanksgiving and Christmas, and for many of us, witches and muggles alike, it corresponds to a chapter of taking things into high gear to finish out our final goals for the year with a bang, and to empower ourselves to be abundant gift givers in time for the winter holidays. We embrace the building excitement of the holiday season to boost our energy, passion, and optimism, and use that power to succeed at what we had set out to achieve this year. And it also spearheads our desires for the most ideal holiday and/or set ourselves up for the most ideal year ahead. Sagittarius represents looking and moving forward, but not from a place of sheer curiosity or blind ambition. Sagittarius season invites us to keep hold of that playfully curious energy of Gemini, but moving forward from a place of wisdom, experience, and focus. For no matter what the season, we can't have one side of the coin without the other. And interestingly enough, the actual astrology of each zodiac season supports this concept of balance. For every Sagittarius season contains within it a full moon in the opposite sign of Gemini. You see, when the sun is in any sign, the full moon has to take place in the opposite sign because the full moon is a type of transit known as an opposition, meaning the sun and moon are on opposite sides of the solar system, which is why we're able to see the reflection of the sun's light illuminating the entire face of the moon. This year, the full moon in Gemini is on December 15th. These are just the kinds of things in my witchy practice that get me really excited to nerd out over the wonder of the universe. By celebrating both the solar sabbat and embracing its opposite by celebrating the full moon, we're able to accept the universe's gift of perfect balance. And as if that wasn't all mind-blowing enough, there's more. There's also a way to tune into balancing all 4 elements within this astrological approach to seasonal living. Just like the sun cycles through the 12 signs, leading it to also cycle through each of the 4 elements 3 times in a year, the moon actually does the exact same thing, only on a monthly basis instead of yearly. During each moon cycle, the moon spends a couple of days in each of the 12 signs, and when we take note of the 4 main phases of the lunar cycle, being the new moon, first quarter moon, full moon, and last quarter, we get a perfect dose of all 4 elements. Surrounding the Sagittarius season, we have the last quarter waning moon in Virgo, the mutable sign of the feminine earth element. Then we have the new moon in Sagittarius, the mutable sign of the masculine fire element. This is the obligatory conjunction between the sun and moon that results in the predictable new moon that always happens in the same sign that the sun is in every zodiac season. And then there's the first quarter waxing moon in Pisces, the mutable sign of the feminine water element. And finally, there's the full moon in Gemini, the mutable sign of the masculine air element. This is that opposition between the sun and moon that results in the full moon being in the opposite sign from what the sun is in each zodiac season. Now, notice that I've pointed out how all 4 of these main moon phases are taking place in mutable signs, which reinforce the overarching theme of Sagittarius season being a time of transition. And notice how we can tune into the elements and their alternating masculine and feminine affinities to be both exerting energy effectively and be open to receiving the benefits of doing so. From there, we'll shift out of this chapter of mutable energy and into a new pattern relating to the cardinal signs of the zodiac in time for Capricorn season in late December. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I really wasn't consistent with lunar astrology until fairly recently, because in our busy lives, this practice of paying attention to not just the moon phase, but also the moon sign, can seem really overwhelming or easy to lose track of unless you A, have an understanding of how it works, and or B, are putting a system in place to help you keep up in a relevant and sustainable practice. This idea of keeping up with both the moon phases and signs used to really confuse and overwhelm me, until I learned to look at it from this cyclical living perspective. After committing to practicing it for a while, I saw how magical, inspiring, and beneficial it could be in my cyclical living practice. And that's why I front-loaded the work of researching the dates of the phases and signs and creating prompts and notifications that not only remind us of when they are, but also provide a super simple template for learning the patterns and embodying the themes. I've designed journal prompt pages and pre-scheduled posts in the Writing Witch Coven to remind us of when the moon phases are, what sign they're in, and what questions to ask ourselves each week to naturally embrace their energies in practical, empowering ways. So now we don't just say it's the new moon, so I'm setting intentions. Now we can instead say it's the new moon in Gemini, so I'm setting intentions related to mindset and communication. And instead of just saying it's the waxing moon, so I'm taking action, now we can actually say it's the waxing moon in Pisces, so I'm taking action to follow my intuition and give myself permission to dream. I've done all of this work for you and for myself so that we can enjoy the flow of it going forward. So if this aspect of seasonal living inspires you, but you don't want it to take up too much time and energy each week, then the Writing Witch Coven is for you. It's also for you if you're feeling really inspired by all the mind-blowing information in this video so far. This series is packed with powerful information that you're going to want to remember, and since I want you to be able to retain and implement it in empowering ways, you don't have to worry about writing all of this down. Members of the Build Your Grimoire tier in the Writing Witch Coven on Patreon receive a grimoire chapter for their binder this month that's essentially a written version of everything we're going over in this video. But regardless of which tier you decide to join, all Coven members get support to stay consistent in our cyclical witchy lifestyles by tuning into a few simple journal prompts per week that keep us in tune with the sabbat seasons, zodiac wheel, and moon signs, all of which work together to guide our well-balanced practice. Each member receives my beautifully designed grimoire prompt pages, as well as notifications when it's an important astrological phase or seasonal checkpoint, so you never have to feel like you're falling out of tune with the seasons of nature. Depending on which tier you decide to join, you'll get access to lunar astrology prompts only, or upgrade to join us for our yearly seasonal living challenge, where we journal and set intentions on the themes of the 8 sabbats in the weeks surrounding each of the checkpoints on the wheel of the year. Or upgrade to the top tier, which gets all of the above, plus a handmade Book of Shadows binder from me, and a whole new set of themed information and prompt pages each month, which in 2024 into 2025 include a beautiful transcript of each zodiac video. Okay, so before diving into our slow living ideas on how to celebrate the weeks surrounding Yule, it's important to first take a look at Capricorn season, which takes place in the weeks immediately following the winter solstice. So Capricorn is the 10th sign of the zodiac, and it's the first official sign of the winter season. From a seasonal living perspective, the moment the sun moves into the sign of Capricorn is the astronomical winter solstice in the northern hemisphere and the summer solstice in the southern hemisphere. So while many of us in the pagan and witchy community tend to choose a day on the Gregorian calendar to celebrate Yule every year, or Litha if you're down under, the modern calendar and astrological calendar don't always match up perfectly, so the actual date of this occurrence can vary slightly from year to year. For example, I tend to think of the Yule Sabbat as taking place between December 20th and 22nd. But actually, the sun moves into Capricorn this year on December 21st at 4:19 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Some practitioners like to be hyper aware of the exact dates and times of the astrology each unique year as they're planning their observances, celebrations, and rituals. And while I find the idea of that really cool, in my practice, I'm far more concerned with a slow living / seasonal living approach to my witchy path, more so than exact dates. So while I do find it valuable to be aware of when the sun changes signs, just so we kind of understand what energy we're in, rather than worrying too much about that, I prefer to flow through the shift more fluidly as I gradually embody the themes of each season. And an easy way to remember when to check the changing of the zodiac signs is to just keep in mind that it always happens within a few days of the 20th of every month on the Gregorian calendar. Capricorn energy is related to the divine feminine earth element, and its main theme is ambition. The archetype of Capricorn is the crone or sage aspect of life, so Capricorn season invites us to use our wisdom and experience to make practical and aligned choices. This period between about December 21st and about January 20th is a great time to set practical intentions related to manifesting stability and success. Capricorn's alchemical element is earth, the element of physical health, wealth, tangible success, and groundedness. Capricorn's quality or modality is cardinal, the modality related to kickstarting a new season. In the case of Capricorn, it's the start of winter in the northern hemisphere and the start of summer in the southern hemisphere. On the wheel of the year, Yule is often represented as a time of being generous towards others. This is really only possible in a healthy way with the ability to plan, prioritize, budget, and work efficiently to make sure that yours and your loved ones' needs are being met. The symbol for Capricorn is the mountain goat, a symbol of ambition, success, and sure-footedness. The ruling planet is Saturn, the luminary related to the god of time in the ancient Greco-Roman pantheon. Named Kronos by the Greeks and Saturn by the Romans, he was the god of time, generation, abundance, and periodic liberation. The key phrase for Capricorn is "I use," and Capricorn represents legacy, tradition, and that which is tried and true. The opposite of Capricorn is Cancer, the cardinal sign that kicks off the summer season in the northern hemisphere later around June 20th. But we know that these opposites aren't really true opposites, just opposite sides of the same spectrum of themes. Capricorn/Yule deals with themes of prioritizing outward success, whereas Cancer/Litha deals with themes of prioritizing inner security and protecting that which is within the home. The universal theme of the Cancer-Capricorn axis is the balance of making things happen in the external world versus focusing on protecting and maintaining that which is right in front of you, or within. Capricorn works hard so that we can rest and be comfortable later on when embodying Cancer themes. And in turn, Cancer makes the inner world and the home feel safe and comfortable so that we'll then have the energy to go out into the world and achieve our goals later when we're embodying Capricorn. And while we're on the subject of spectrums, I think it's important to address the hemispheres as they pertain to the wheel of the year and the zodiac wheel. As we all know, the traditional pagan wheel of the year, which modern pagans have borrowed from the Wicca religion, which has borrowed ideas from ancient European traditions, is oriented to the northern hemisphere. And based on my experience communing with witches from all around the world online, it's most common for pagans in the southern hemisphere to reverse the wheel to appropriately fit their seasons. And what's really magical about this concept of reversal is that it too reminds us not just of the imperfection of the northern biased wheel of the year system, but actually of the perfect balance of the universe when we expand outside of that perspective. You see, even though the southern hemisphere is celebrating the summer solstice, when my neck of the woods is celebrating the winter solstice, that doesn't render it contradictory that it's Capricorn season regardless of where you live. It actually still makes sense. Just as early winter represents the season of taking action to kickstart our New Year's resolutions, early summer represents the season of embodying your desired feelings, an equally important aspect of manifestation that's often undervalued or overlooked. They're both two sides of the same coin, and this axis teaches us to both do and be. Surrounding this Capricorn season, we have the new moon in Capricorn, the cardinal sign of the feminine earth element. This is the predictable conjunction between the sun and moon that takes place in the same sign the sun is in each moon cycle. And next is the first quarter waxing moon in the sign of Aries, the cardinal sign of the masculine fire element. And then the next week is the full moon in Cancer, the cardinal sign of the feminine water element. This is the predictable full moon that happens in the opposite sign from what the sun is in each moon cycle. And then finally, there's the last quarter waning moon in Libra, the cardinal sign of the masculine air element. Again, notice how I've pointed out that all four of these moon phases are taking place in cardinal signs, which reinforce the overarching theme of Capricorn season being a time of new beginnings. And notice how we can tune into the elements and their alternating masculine and feminine affinities to be both exerting energy effectively and being open to receive the benefits of doing so. And from there, we shift out of that chapter of cardinal energy and into a new pattern relating to the fixed signs of the zodiac in time for Aquarius season in late January. Okay, so now that we're done nerding out about the what and the why of the winter solstice season and where it fits into astrology and the wheel of the year, let's shift into embodiment by delving into the how to embrace the season. Here are 4 powerful themes of Yule season, using the 4 elements as a guide. How you go about embodying these ideas will differ depending on your goals and what your practice is like, but for real-world examples, I'll be sharing how I've embraced these themes so far on my path. You can plan to focus on one theme per week in alignment with the elements of the 4 main moon phases discussed above, or you can simply go about them whenever you feel inspired to do so throughout the season. Earth. Learn about the plants and foods of Yuletide. When many of us think of green witchcraft, herbal, and plant magic, we tend to think of the spring and summer, a time when we're planting our gardens or foraging for wild, magical, and medicinal plants. But the colder, darker half of the year can be just as magical a time to tap into your green witchery. The winter solstice itself takes place when the sun moves into the sign of Capricorn, the zodiac season related to the earth element, structure, tradition, practicality, and stability. This makes it a great time of year to tap into those cozy traditional earth element practices like kitchen herbalism. So let's take a quick look at some of our favorite traditional plants and herbs that we tend to associate with the winter season. Cinnamon. What do you think of when you think of cinnamon? For me, I think of it as the first scent and flavor that we start craving when we get nostalgic about the colder, darker half of the year. Some folks might say pumpkin spice, but what we call pumpkin spice is actually a spice blend with cinnamon as its base. Spices like cinnamon and pumpkin spice are at the intersection between spicy and sweet, which both give us that fire to keep us going when the sunlight is scarce, and the sweet comfort we desire on colder days. Medicinally, cinnamon also makes total sense for the winter season. It's considered a warming herb and can actually help warm your hands and feet. It's also a digestive herb that helps us to handle all the heavier foods we tend to eat during the holiday season. Magically, it's said to be associated with the fire element, aiding in spells for protection, luck, and desire. All things that go really well with setting intentions for the holiday season and the new year. Squashes. Now, I know squashes and pumpkins tend to be isolated to the fall in pop culture, but when we think more deeply into the origins of humans' relationship with these plants, there's a lot more going on. While the popular story of Thanksgiving is a largely inaccurate representation of how the Native Americans were treated in colonial America, it does make sense that we think of them sharing pumpkins with the Europeans to help them survive. Squashes with thick skins that come to fruition in the fall are considered winter squash, and for good reason. Long before we had refrigerators, our ancestors would have relied on crops like these to keep a healthy amount of produce in their diet over winter. I tend to think of squashes as a representation of abundance, gratitude, and stability. I've made a personal tradition out of keeping a pumpkin or squash intact from the autumn equinox through to the spring equinox, before then cutting it open, feasting on it, and planting some of the fresh seeds as a full circle ritual. Some witches work with squash for prosperity and protection, which does work with the medicinal properties, which are antimicrobial and lowering blood pressure. So apparently it helps us to beat winter illness and winter anxiety. Apples. Yep, apples are another one of those fall harvest foods that has the capacity to stay fresh without refrigeration. Kept in a cool, dry place out of direct sunlight, apples can last through the winter. It's said that the holiday tradition of wassailing has its roots in honoring the apple trees and evolved into a Yuletide practice of brewing up a mulled cider bowl and celebrating with the community. For me, apples are a celebration of the abundance of the harvest, whether that be a literal harvest of crops like apples to decorate the home with and conjure up into delicious seasonal recipes, or if that harvest be simply celebrating that you're abundant enough to buy a gallon of cider from the store every week in the fall and winter. Medicinally, it's said that an apple a day keeps the doctor away. Apple is a cleansing herb and digestive aid, so the witchy practice of using apples for protection checks out. Ever since I started drinking cider daily throughout the fall and winter, I've noticed that I never gain a pound, not even when I'm spending more time on the couch eating comfort food. And I'm now convinced maybe it's the cider. You can also make fire cider, a powerful herbal immune boosting potion with apple cider vinegar as a base. Plus, apple has a lot of folklore, myths, superstitions, and folk magic associated with it too. And that goes far beyond simply using it for detoxification. The most simple of these ideas is that when you cut an apple horizontally, you'll see the symbol of the pentagram, and when you cut it vertically, it shows the womb of the goddess. There isn't enough time in this video to share all the interesting folklore, so I invite you to grab a mug of cider and tuck into some research rabbit holes. And if this idea of being aware of the magical and medicinal qualities of traditional produce and herbs associated with the winter time is something that interests you, I actually wrote an entire article on this very subject for Starlight magazine. If you haven't heard, Starlight is a seasonal publication put out by my friend and colleague Tanae Stewart, the Witch of Lupin Hollow, and I've been a regular contributor since winter 2021. It's also a great resource for diving into subjects like seasonal astrology and how to actually implement what you're learning to experience more fulfillment in each season of your life. And what's awesome is that it includes articles from a diverse range of different witches' perspectives, and each contributing writer gets an affiliate link that supports them to continue doing the work they're passionate about. And back issues are available in digital form, so if you'd like to read the actual article I wrote on herbology of winter foods and spices, you can still get instant access to it. If you choose to make any purchases of physical copies, digital copies, or subscriptions through the link I've shared here, a percentage of your purchase goes to me, so thank you so much if you choose to support my work and my channel in this way. It's also a lot of fun this time of year to learn about the history and traditions surrounding our favorite, and even some of the more obscure, holiday recipes. Last year, I deep dove into the concept of the mince pie. As both an American and someone who didn't grow up celebrating Christmas, this delicacy was totally foreign to me until I came across it on a British YouTube channel. But as someone who loves both winter spices and savory pies, this strange tradition had me intrigued, especially the idea that its modern form is essentially a vegetarian dessert that's named after an ancient meat-filled pastry. Last year, after going down the rabbit hole to learn more about the various branches of culinary and cultural history associated with the mince pie, I had fun trying my hand at both a sweet and a savory version. And what's more, coming up with my own vegetarian version of the savory pie using a vegan meat alternative. Now, while I don't actually recommend eating manufactured artificial meats all the time from a health perspective, the holidays are, in my mind, a time when it's okay to treat yourself to a little something extra yummy, even if it's more processed than what I would normally include in my diet. In fact, part of the history of the mince pie is this idea that it was supposed to be the very epitome of indulgence for the holiday time. Being a pastry stuffed with exotic spices, red meat, and/or the richest and most expensive dried fruits that were, in the Middle Ages, essentially considered indulgent sweets, it was thought of as a truly special treat that was so good it was almost sinful. And I would say, I have to agree. I actually strongly preferred the sweet savory version as opposed to the sweet version, and it's honestly one of the best things I've ever tasted. It's definitely one of those things that really only makes sense to make around the holidays, and I now look forward to making a tradition out of making it every year. But that's just my favorite traditional holiday food. There's also plum pudding, which doesn't originally include any actual plums, by the way, gingerbread, eggnog, fruitcake, Yule log cake, roast bird, ham, and even hot chocolate that have interesting and meandering histories and folklore that can teach us a lot about the cultures that contributed them to our modern holiday traditions. Fire, a Yule log spell for the new year. Now, this is one that's very close to my heart that you've probably even heard me talk about before if you're not brand new to the channel, which if you are brand new, welcome, and to returning viewers, thank you for being here as usual. But this is one of my favorite rituals because it involves fire, and my moon is in Aries, so I need a little fire every once in a while. Fire is one of the most dominant elements in my personal astrology along with air, so writing things down and sometimes burning things are my go-to spells and rituals. The Yule log itself is thought to be based on a very ancient Nordic tradition of burning a large evergreen throughout the entire Yuletide season, or throughout the 12 days of Christmas in later traditions. But my personal version is a spell for the new year where I write down everything that I'm letting go of from the past year on one side of a page, and then everything I'm calling in for the new year on the other side. I tie this paper along with relevant seasonal herbs and plants to a small log and burn this in my outdoor fire pit. But when I lived in an apartment, I came up with an apartment-friendly version of the spell using just a pine cone. In fact, I actually used my Yule pine cone spell from 2022 to manifest my new home with a yard where I would be able to burn a real log for the following winter solstice. Because it was exactly these types of elemental rituals that I was deeply desiring the freedom to be able to do again, and now I finally can. So I'm not going to go into a full tutorial in this video because I actually made an entire video on it that year, so be sure to check that one out, whether you have a fireplace, outdoor fire pit, or if you live in an apartment and have to do the quick and discreet version by burning a pine cone. Water, a wassail bowl ritual. In the previous video in this series, we briefly touched upon the tradition of wassailing, a historic European tradition of making offerings of cider to the apple orchards and singing to them in hopes of having an abundant harvest in the year to come. Depending on the time period and culture, this can take place anywhere between the autumn equinox through Samhain and the winter solstice. It also overlaps with the Yule tradition of the wassail bowl, where a community would make a brew of cider, wine, and spices to be carried to each household, where songs would be sung and people would add more to the bowl as it was continuously passed around. But where does this concept come from? Starting with the word wassail itself, it was derived from the Old Norse Wassail and the Old English Wassail. and meaning be in good health or be fortunate. It wasn't necessarily always associated with drinking, but at some point, the greeting Wassail started being responded to with the phrase drink hail, meaning essentially be merry and drink merry, or be well and drink well. Eventually, people started merging the words together into one word, Wassail. Some of the earliest written evidence of the word was actually in the popular 8th century poem Beowulf, where it says, "The rider sleepeth, the hero far hidden, no harp resounds, in the courts no wassail, as was once heard." And the anonymous Anglo-Norman poet who witnessed the Saxon toasting cry before the Battle of Hastings in 1066 wrote, "Rejoice and wassail, pass the bottle and drink health. Drink backwards and drink to me, drink half and drink empty." And I don't know about you, but this quote begs the question for me. What exactly is drinking backwards? I'm thinking of a college frat party where they want everyone to have such a good time that they end up barfing later. But if there's a more sophisticated meaning, please do enlighten us in the comments. In Geoffrey of Monmouth's 1135 writing, History of the Kings of Britain, it tells of King Vortigern being entertained at a royal banquet and a girl offering him a drink of wine along with the greeting, Wassail. He asked his interpreter what it meant and how to reply. He replied, "She did you honor by drinking your health. What you should reply is, drink hail." It's believed that the drink offered in the story was a descendant of the Roman drink called hivicress, a spiced wine containing what we tend to think of as winter spices like cinnamon, nutmeg, and ginger. All things that were considered exotic and expensive flavors to the later British, as they would have had to import those things only for use by the wealthy. By the 13th century, the story had evolved to tell of how everyone at Vortigern's party passed the drink around, repeating the set of phrases to each other. And it became popular at the time for the wealthy to have wassail bowls crafted out of fine materials. They would often float or dip toasted bread in the bowl, which is where we get the phrase toast as a drinking term. Eventually, this concept caught on to the masses, and they started using more accessible materials to craft the containers and mix the drink. And in medieval times, farming communities held the tradition of wassailing as a ritual of offering to their apple orchards, saying, "Let every man take off his hat and shout out to the old apple tree, 'Apple tree, we wassail thee,' and hoping you will bear." It appears to have been in this time period and context that the drink of wassail became synonymous with apple cider, which was and is an important cash crop in parts of rural England where this version of wassailing is still practiced today by some communities. In the 1700s, wassail was described as a liquor made of apples, sugar, and ale, anciently much used by English goodfellows. Lamb's wool is merely a variety of the wassail bowl. Formerly, the first day of November was dedicated to the angel presiding over fruits, seeds, etc., and was therefore named La Mas Abal. That is the day of the apple fruit, being pronounced La Masul. Our country people have corrupted it into lamb's wool. Some people also believe this tradition of wassailing the trees stemmed from or crossed over with an earlier pagan tradition that may have even hailed to the Roman goddess of apples, Pomona, of pouring cider on the tree roots and hanging cider-soaked bread on the branches to ward away evil spirits. And there's also the theory that it's called the lamb's wool merely because of the foam that was formed on the top of the drink from the mashed apple, bread, and ale. So this is one of those traditions whose historical theory is kind of all over the place. And by the 1600s, it became popular for people to go door to door with the wassail bowl between Christmas and New Year's, offering drinks from it in exchange for donations, crossing over with the history of things like caroling and trick-or-treating, a practice that continued to evolve up until the mid-1900s in both England and the US. The wassail bowl was one of the first historical traditions that I learned about when I discovered the magic of the holidays. It was presented in my research at the time as a sort of ritual representing abundance in the new year. For the bowl was said to be carried through the community, being drank from and poured into with ingredients from each home as it went, never being allowed to empty. and I've always loved the idea of filling a large bowl with cider, wine, spices, and positive intentions for the year ahead. If you're into herbal correspondence, you can even choose spices that correspond to your intentions. As for me, I just like to be loosely mindful of the magical properties of the ingredients that I'm intuitively throwing into it as I speak my words of power over the liquid to program it like a crystal. And now that I'm thinking about it, even though I've definitely never heard of anything like the Wassail Bowl until my adult life when I started learning about the history of the holidays, it does actually remind me of something from my childhood. I remember at some point in the mid-90s, my aunt mailed my mom this Amish friendship bread. Let me know in the comments if you've ever heard of this. I feel like I need to do more research on it now, but essentially it was a very cinnamony bread dough. And the idea is that someone would start making this bread at some point, and then they would use half of the dough to make a loaf for themselves, and then they would give half of the loaf to a friend, along with the recipe for how to make more of the dough. And everyone who received a piece of the dough had to mix that dough in with their own dough, and then give a piece of that dough to another person. And I guess the idea of it was just friendship and linking people together, but it seems really magical, and I completely forgot about that until just now when I was thinking about the Wassail Bowl, and maybe that's why this idea of the Wassail Bowl intrigued me so much without me even realizing why. It's kind of like a more personal and hands-on and less annoying version of chain emails. Air. Learn about Yuletide traditions. Air is the element of learning and education, and as illustrated by our section on wassailing above, this time of year is rich with history, tradition, and a lot more documentation than a lot of the other holidays on the Wheel of the Year. As I briefly mentioned in this video, but gone deeper into in previous older videos, I was not raised to celebrate Christmas, as my household identified as Muslim when I was growing up. So when I started leaning into my nature-based spiritual path in early adulthood and stumbled upon the Wheel of the Year, this was to some extent my first introduction to Christmas, beyond simply living in a society where most everyone else celebrated it. I had always loved the idea of celebrating the magic of the seasons, but while I lived in a culture that essentially bombarded me with it, I also grew up in a family and religious culture that barred me from the entire concept of Christmas. Not so much because it was Christian, but more so because of its pagan origins, actually. For me, taking that first Yuletide season of my year in a day to deep dive into Yuletide education was a sort of rebellious reclamation of the curiosity I had always had for the worship of nature. I used that time to consume all the articles and documentaries I could find on the subject, from Wiccan and pagan-made content to Christian propaganda urging their members not to celebrate the pagan traditions of Christmas, to just mainstream content meant to inform the masses of what the heck they were all even celebrating in the first place. By the end of that season, I'm sure I knew more about the origins of most Christmas traditions than most people who had been celebrating it for their entire lives. And while a lot of what I learned was never meant to become an active part of my belief system or personal practice, I loved the process of learning about it and getting inspired to create my own traditions that were relevant to me, while giving a nod to where these ideas may have come from. So whether you're new to the entire concept of Yuletide traditions, or if you've grown up with some version of it and haven't done a deep dive before, this is your invitation to do some research. Nowadays, there's a ton more information readily available than what I was able to find back in the early to mid 20-teens. And it's important to keep in mind that all of it, old and new, should be consumed with a grain of salt. Some are a lot more well-researched than others, and this season comes along with a lot of different, strongly biased opinions. But that's part of what makes it interesting, isn't it? This time of year means something to a lot of different people, even those who are rejecting it. It means something to them that they're rejecting it, right? It's a very energetically charged time. While it's old and kind of watered down, a fun place to start is the 90s History Channel documentary, which I had remembered watching as a kid. It was so interesting to revisit it from my adult perspective, and it covers several of the stages of Yuletide through the ages that may spark your inspiration for a deeper study. I've linked this one along with some other videos I think are worth watching in the playlist linked on the screen. So, which of these seasonal living ideas inspires you the most? Which ones are you most excited to try this season? I would love to hear your ideas in the comments. And be sure to join us in the Writing Witch Coven to get a beautifully written transcript of this episode for your grimoire and to easily stay in tune with cyclical living. Memberships start as low as $11 a month, and you get access to the previous seasons that we've already covered as an instant download. And for more ideas on how to embrace the winter solstice themes, I invite you to check out this video right here. Or if you've seen that one already, come and join me on my new vlog channel, where you can see what kind of green witchy adventures and kitchen witchery I'm getting up to this season. See you there!